Hello, I am Stamatis, one of the Residence Life Coordinators, and I want to welcome you in the Conflict Resolution training. The learning outcomes of this presentation will be to define causes and types of conflicts, to identify and explain active listening skills, identify and explain different nonverbal communication, and finally, to identify and explain techniques for verbal communication. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. Under certain circumstances, conflict is welcome. It could be a beginning for positive change. What are the possible causes for conflict, though? Different values can lead to conflicts. Would you place fame before honor, money before recognition, honesty before reputation? Making assumptions could also lead to conflicts. Let's have an example. One roommate, let's call her Kristen, assumes that the other roommate, let's say Katie, will have cleaned their kitchen when Kristen gets home from the lab. Kristen gets to do lots of work. She works so hard at her research, and she doesn't really make use of the common areas. Whereas on the other hand, Katie loves to cook and has a much less demanding course load. Kristen gets back to the flat and realizes that the kitchen hasn't been cleaned. Conflict between Katie and Kristen can result. But wait a second. Different expectations can lead to conflict too. We expect people to know things without us telling them. What do you mean they cannot read our minds? Well, isn't that obvious? Well, not really. A lot of things are not obvious to many people. Just because you may have your expectations doesn't mean that it's the expectations of other people too. No wonder there's so much resentment and conflict going around. Another possible cause for conflict could be differences in the way that you were brought up. Your religion, your gender, your race, your ethnicity can result in conflict with people who are different than you. If you were a woman born in the 1930s and who grew up during the Great Depression, and someone who grew up during the free love in 70s may have a conflict with you regarding marriage and its vows, for example. Also, those who lived under, quote, Eastern philosophies in their home countries may view life in a different way than those who were raised in, quote, Western cultures. We see this all the time between men and women too. We say that a man can act aggressive at work, but the same actions by a woman are viewed as her being a bad woman. Gender can play a major role in conflicts. Finally, your very knowledge and ability to deal with conflict can itself result in conflict. If you don't know how to resolve conflict or are unwilling to try to resolve it, this in itself can conflict with someone else who has more knowledge and is more willing than you are. For example, if two nations are unwilling to resolve their differences, they're bound to keep that conflict alive for future generations. We see this in the news every day. Neither side is willing to give an inch to the other side, and so the conflict continues. Now that we know the 5 main causes of conflict, what can we do to resolve it? Karl Jaspers said that conflicts may be the sources of defeat, lost life, and a limitation of our potentiality, but they may also lead to greater depth of living and the birth of more far-reaching unities, which flourish in the tensions that engender them. Conflict arises when one or more participants view the current system as not working. At least one of the parties is not quite satisfied with some currently established practice, and they're willing to own the conflict and speak up with the hope of being able to influence the situation to arrive at an improved condition. Conflict, therefore, may be viewed as a process we put ourselves through to achieve a new condition and self-definition. If nothing else, conflict allows us to do things differently in the future. Through the integration of participants' perspectives, interests, belief systems, and values, conflict and conflict resolution play important roles in individual and social evolution and development. That is why we talk about the evolutionary nature of conflict. There is a great benefit in terms of the quality of our lives in being able to constructively resolve conflict with those around us. Through conflict, we have opportunities to be creatively self-defining. Through the resolution of conflict, we can, if we choose, evolve and redefine ourselves, our relationships, our community, our society, and our world. We most often find ourselves in conflict with those with whom we spend the most time: family, friends, business associates, fellow organizational members, our line managers, our residents, and sometimes even ourselves. Remember that there are two types of conflict: an interpersonal and an intrapersonal. Interpersonal conflict is defined as that which exists between two or more people. On the other hand, an intrapersonal conflict arises within oneself. In an effort to help prepare you for those situations, we will go through a series of tips and tools to help you in any conflict or counseling situation. What are the skills that you need to have? What follows here is a series of skills that we consider very important to have as an RA. In fact, we consider them so important that we will be covering each and every one of them during training this year. The first of those skills is active listening, the basic foundation for peer counseling. Active listening should be communicated in two ways: non-verbally and verbally. Remember that about 80% of communication is based on non-verbal cues. Therefore, non-verbally would mean, what is your body language saying? And verbally, what are your words saying? What did you actually mean to say, and can those words be interpreted in a different way? Remember 80%? Nonverbal communication can have so many different forms. Take a look. Moving on to verbal communication. Linguistics has established a very thorough model of communication. According to that, every time we're about to begin expressing our thoughts, with respect to a specific context, of course, we use the common language as a medium. It's a channel of communication. Communicator A would use language in order to express their thoughts. They choose specific words to do so that reach communicator B. Communicator B, from their perspective, decodes the information and, in their turn, send their response with respect to the context, using preferably the same medium of common language. We go about this exchange of information by using specific techniques for verbal communication. Remember that you will be trained in all of these in greater depth during your RA induction. The first technique to use for successful verbal communication is reflection and paraphrasing. What does this mean? It means acting as a verbal mirror. The main functions would be to ask for verification of what you think you understand, to ask for clarification on what you definitely don't understand, to demonstrate accurate empathy to the other party, and to focus your attention on them. Remember the last time you talked to someone and they gave you the impression that you have their full attention even for 3 minutes? That feels good. The second technique is summarizing. Attempt to capture the essence of what has been said to you, tying together content and feeling. Summaries help put things in perspective for all the parties involved. They also provide the opportunity to clarify the most important parts of the person's experience. If you miss the main point, the person will come back to it and let you know. In order to do that, though, you will have to summarize. third technique is I statements. I don't feel that this is the right approach, or I don't think that we should be focusing on this right now. I statements don't feel as blaming. They make people feel less defensive. They allow you to take responsibility for your feelings and your feelings alone. I statements should be required from residents when having a roommate mediation, for example, and this is something that will be covered in a different presentation. Action complaints. Instead of focusing on what the person is, focus on what they do that is being problematic. In order to avoid blame, diagnosis, mind reading, and generalizations, complain about actions, not personalities or theories, and talk about specific incidents. That would lead you straight into the next technique, action requests. Action requests involve asking the other individual to do something different in the future. Instead of trying to get them to change their personality, it is usually less threatening and more conducive to focus on what they could do that would work better. Sometimes we phrase our requests in vague language, or we use vague examples. By using specific incidents, you will be getting faster and more efficient results. Make sure that your requests are as specific as possible about time and actions. And if the request does not work, rephrase the request or see if there was a misunderstanding about the actions requested. And finally, praise their actions. Sometimes we neglect to tell others the things that we appreciate about what they do. Even when we do comment on what we like about someone, sometimes we're vague or general. Again, be specific. During conversations, we sometimes tend to forget certain core concepts of good communication. A list of effective listening tools could turn every interaction into effective communication. Therefore, don't take what is said personally, and try to listen with compassion. Just hear the communication, hear what is being said, and make sure you keep a clear purpose of what you want to say. Suspend the need to be right. Do not tolerate abusive behavior, but at the same time, don't sell out and look for the best in people. Acknowledge people, forgive others, and communicate your upsets.